Ready? Journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but that step needs to be in the right direction and a right temperament. Today we are going to talk about what it takes to be an entrepreneur. We'll be talking about a successful journey of a man who who put his first step in Silicon Valley around 1983. He worked for various companies. He started as a consultant, then he worked as a developer, as a VP of various successful companies like NetApp, Sun Microsystem, and Data Domain. Until in late 2007, he, along with his friend, found his very own company, Nimble Storage, which has grasped an enormous success. Despite of being so successful, he is very humble and down to earth. I welcome Mr. Varun Mehta, co-founder and VP of Engineering, Nimble Storage.
Thanks, Amit.
Varun, can you tell more about yourself to our audience, right from which city of India you came from, and little bit about your family background?
Sure. So I grew up mostly in Bombay, but I went to school in actually mostly in Rajasthan. So I went to boarding school in Rajasthan, and then I went to BITS Pilani, where I did my engineering. So, and as it turns out, Suresh, our CEO, is also from BITS. So we have a few BITS people here. And then I came here for my master's. I went to Rice University in Houston. And after Rice, I got a job at Sun Microsystems. So I started there working on performance, and also got my first taste of storage there, because I started working on NFS, which was a protocol that Sun had invented. And so that's when I fell in love with storage and with file systems. And do you want me to continue a little bit about
Sure.
some of the other companies I went to after that? So Sun was an interesting company. It was the hot company in the valley at the time that I joined, which was in 1988. And it had been started by a group of people from Stanford. So at that time, I got my first taste of watching entrepreneurs, and I kind of fell in love with the idea. And I knew at some point I wanted to start my own company. But it takes a long time, and I actually had 3 other ideas before I eventually founded Nimble. So starting a company is, it's a good vision, but it takes a lot of things to come together. And I can talk a little bit about it. You might even have a question about how we got started.
Actually, you answered a few more questions which I was about to ask.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, and we can go through some of the other questions, but I'll tell you some of what happened later. So the first step after Sun was to actually go to a startup to see how they operated. I had very little idea of how a startup works, and Sun was a 6,000 person company when I joined. So when you're in such a large company and you start out as a junior engineer, you get very little visibility into how the whole company operates. But at Sun, I moved to NetApp, and NetApp was a tiny company. It was a 10-person company. I loved the product. They were doing an NFS system. I understood NFS very well. I understood the potential that NetApp had. And so I started working, I started applying to them, and a little while later they responded back and I joined them. And so I was there for about 7 years and rose up through the ranks. And at NetApp, I got a good overview of how a startup operates, because everything is very transparent. You see all the execs, you see all the sales coming in. So it was a very nice environment to learn about Silicon Valley and startups.
Since you mentioned about Sun Microsystems and NetApp, so did you work closely with Mr. Vinod Khosla and Dave Hetz?
So at Sun, when I was there, Vinod had already left. Vinod was a Valley legend, but he left Sun fairly early. So the founder that I did get to meet was Andy Bechtelsheim, who was actually the engineering part of Sun when he first started. And then the other founders of Sun were still there. So Bill Joy, who wrote a significant part of Berkeley the Berkeley Unix distribution, and Scott McNeely, who was the CEO then. And then at NetApp, I met all the founders. So certainly Dave Hitz and James Lau were the two founders. There was a third founder who was the CEO, Mike Malcolm, but he left fairly early on.
So coming on to the next question is, what does it really takes to be an entrepreneur?
There are a few things. I think the first thing is you and your family have to be seriously committed to this, because there are a lot of people who are going to say your idea is not going to work, and you have to be the best proponent of your idea. You have to believe in it fervently. So this was actually one of the reasons why I took 3 tries actually, and after that, the 4th try, I was successful, which was I myself did not believe in my ideas strongly enough that I could stand up in front of a group of people and say, okay, this is going to be a big thing. So I think you absolutely have to firmly believe in the idea that you have. Now, for me personally, there were a few other things. So actually, the other things are, you have to be in a place where you are financially able to take some risk. You can do that when you don't have a family, because you can get by on very little. If you have a family, then it helps to have some success, some prior success, so that your family is looked after while you take this big risk, because you have to be prepared for failure. And so you have to say, okay, if things don't work out, at least at the end of it, I'll just get another job, and you have enough for your family to get by on. The other thing that I find is very useful to be an entrepreneur is to look for a technology disruption, because anytime there is a technology disruption, it allows room for innovation. And looking at all of the successful startups that I've been associated with over my career, they all got their start because there was some external technology disruption that allowed them to then innovate. And it was the same with Nimble. There was the emergence of Flash, and that was a huge external technology disruption that allowed us to rethink the way file systems are created. And so that's another thing to look out for, to be ready for entrepreneurship. Another thing which is a little less important today, but is still useful, is to have relationships with people who will give you money. So eventually you will need to raise some money. Now it's a little less of a concern, especially for people in the mobile space or gaming space or app space, where it doesn't take very much work to build a functioning system, a prototype where people can either download your game, or if you have a website, they can come to your website. So you can start getting users very, very quickly and then go raise money. In our case, building an enterprise system, which required a lot of money, we fortunately had good relationships with venture capitalists. So we were able to go to them with our idea, and we were able to get money actually fairly quickly. And that helped us get started.
So did you had a chance to develop a relation when you worked for other companies in past?
Yeah. So I had a history of being a startup. So NetApp, of course, was my first startup, and then I was at 4 or 5 other startups. Once you get a startup bug, it's hard to give it up, because startups allow you to get a lot done with a small team, and you're always working on cutting edge technology. So I've loved startups.
Had you thought about this, owning a business at very early stage, maybe when you were a kid or at college going age?
Yes, in a way, you hear about the legends and of people who have started a company, and you think, these guys have done a great job. Clearly, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were very, very well known. And so you hear about people like that and think, man, that is awesome. Now, that sort of thing is very rare for people who are possibly still teenagers to get started. but they're good role models, and you say, okay, they did some cool things, and hopefully one day, we all will be able to do cool things.
Was there any role model for you?
Not particularly. There wasn't one person that I looked at and said, I want to be just like that person. No, it was more of, in Silicon Valley, these things are possible. So come to Silicon Valley. I'm not sure which path exactly I'll take, but there will be an opportunity that is open, and it's got all the right mix of things in terms of you can raise money. It is a good place to have new ideas, to hire people, smart people. So that was the plan. That just look at where the opportunities are and then follow them.
How was Nimble Storage born?
Nimble Storage is an interesting, it had a very interesting start. So I had been in storage for a long time, and storage is a really interesting market. It's a very big market, about $30 billion. And so it's possible to have very large companies. And over the years, we had seen many large companies grow and either go to an IPO or get acquired for large amounts of money. So we knew that it was a market that was open to disruption. And so the goal here was to look for disruptions. And it's generally, the disruptions are not something you can predict, they happen. And so for me, the disruption was when I opened up a copy of the Wall Street Journal and saw an ad for the first SSD. Samsung had an ad for the first SSD, and they had the performance specs, and it was 100 times faster than disk drive. And I knew just by looking at that this would be hugely disruptive to storage. And so I started thinking about it. Now, I was at Data Domain prior to this, and so we knew enough. And actually, that's when I reached out to Umesh and said, "Hey, there's this great technology," and he immediately recognized that too. And then we spent a lot of time figuring out how to attack the market, what part of the market to attack, because you can choose whether you want to go low end, mid range, high end. You can choose whether you want what kind of storage device you want. So there were a number of choices, and then also figure out how to get funding. So we spent a lot of the initial time working on defining the market, then the product, then our funding strategy, and then eventually going for funding. And because we knew a number of VCs fairly well, we were able to get funding very, very quickly. So that worked out nicely.
Since you said that it clicked when you saw an ad of SSD, did you guys earlier thought of coming up with a system or an array which is all flash?
That was one of the things we thought about, and then we decided that that all flash would address a fairly small portion of the market. What we wanted was something that could target mainstream storage needs. So we wanted a combination of both very high performance, which an all-flash array gives you, but also very good capacity utilization. So we chose to go at a much broader range of the market. This has positives and negatives. The positives are it's a huge market. The negatives are it takes us directly into competition with the biggest guys in storage against EMC, NetApp, Dell. And so this is something that is always a concern. So what you have to do when you're going up against the biggest guys is your technology has to be way better than what they bring to market. And fortunately, we had that situation in our case because we were able to create a system from the ground up, whereas all our competition was based on legacy technology that was invented before Flash appeared. So now we're in this very happy position of addressing a very large market with a product that is substantially better than what the competition can offer. So we're very happy about that and excited to see where it'll go.
Since you said that you had three ventures earlier before Nimble, would you like to talk about them in brief and how was it helpful and stepping stone for a Nimble?
So I'm not even sure I remember all three right now. I did spend time on them. When I first came to Silicon Valley, I was thinking about them. There were some interesting ideas. Let's see. In terms of stepping stones to Nimble, I guess the best thing was that it put me in a frame of mind that showed me what I needed to do. But you use a lot of experience, so I used that experience. But then, as an engineering manager, I also used a lot of my project management experience, because eventually, when you go to venture capitalists for funding, you have to have a business plan. And so what I had to create was a 2-year plan of how I would hire, how much money I would need, when I would be able to deliver the first rev of the product, when I would be able to deliver the next rev of the product, and also actually not only how I would hire, but the organizations that I would build up. Engineering, support, marketing, sales. So all of that comes from being part of early startups and understanding how the organizations grow.
So your collective earlier experience helped you to build the Nimble Storage.
Right.
What were the challenges and formative years after Nimble was formed?
There's a big famous challenge that we had. So we decided in the beginning to not attack our biggest competitors, who I've talked about, Dell, EMC and NetApp. We decided to not attack them head on in the beginning. Our first thought was to build a product that would work with those products as an accelerator. But we realized very early on that would be a fairly small market, and so we decided to change our product direction from an accelerating device to a full-scale array that would compete directly with the big guys. And so when we did that, our board was not sure of this direction. They said, "Oh my gosh, you are going to compete directly with the big guys." Nobody up to then had done that very successfully. So they were very anxious about that direction. And so we had a lot of discussion. It took many months, and those were fairly dark times, but we got through it. And the board signed on, and we eventually settled on the product direction that we have today. And right from the get-go, we had told them this very aggressive plan for switching products, and we were able to hit that plan. And then once sales started, they started ramping right from day one. So the board was really happy with the direction that we took, because we had very fast sales. In fact, for the first 3.5 months, we had projected that we would do 600,000 in bookings. We did about $1.9 million in bookings. So we went more than 3x over our initial goal. And from then on, we knew that we had made the right decision.
Was there a point where you did not see a way ahead, and how did you win over it?
I think going back to this challenge that we had, where we changed product directions, it wasn't that there was not a way ahead. I think we just had to break a log jam. And so at that point, I had some fairly direct meetings with our investors and said, we have to come to a decision. We cannot go forward the way it is. So in some ways it was sort of one of those ultimatums, a sort of deadline that you impose upon yourself to make a decision. And I think that really helped. I think we, at that point, decided, okay, we have to make a decision. The board signed on, and we were able to move forward.
So you always saw that silver lining.
Yeah. And this goes back to one of the earlier questions you asked about as an entrepreneur, what you need. So the main thing you have to realize is that even though you may have investors with a lot of experience, nobody really knows the market as well as you are, because you're thinking about it 24/7. And so you have to be completely committed to your course of action. And fortunately, I knew exactly where I wanted to go, and fortunately the rest of the team stood behind me. At that time, we had Umesh, of course, as our CTO, and then Dan Leary and Ajay Singh in marketing, and they were all solidly behind this new course of action. And so with the executive team behind me, we were able to make that move, and so that really helped us.
Since you were CEO earlier for Nimble Storage, was there any motive behind stepping down and letting Suresh held that position?
Yeah, everybody's got their strengths, and what I like to do is build things. What I am generally not that happy doing is running large organizations. And so that was one of the discussions actually we had early on with the VCs. And we said, hey, if things go well and we begin to become a large organization, then it will be time to find somebody who enjoys doing that. And so I'm glad we found Suresh. He's turned out to be an excellent CEO, and I'm doing what I like, which is to build systems.
When you are new in the market, biggest challenge is to fetch few first clients. So how did you manage to get your first few clients? Sales when you were not established?
That's a great question, and of course that is sort of the do or die moment for a startup. You built your brand new system, and you wonder, is anybody actually going to buy this thing? And for us, things worked out very well, and the reason things worked out was there was a fair amount of preparation that went into this. So all during the time that we were selling to our board and building the system, we did a lot of customer interviews, over 100 customer interviews, where we described the system that we were building. And we asked them, would you buy the system if it were available? And we'd given them approximate specs. We didn't know the whole specs. And the answer was generally very positive. So that was our first validation point. The second validation point was that we had hired some excellent salespeople. So we hired Matt Jacobs out of Data Domain, and then we hired our current VP of Sales, Mike Munoz, also from Data Domain. And Matt's job was to bring us beta sites, and he managed to enroll 10 beta sites, and we started seeing how they used it. And it was interesting. They started using it actually in ways that we thought were very positive. We had asked if they, what critical business systems they wanted to run on, and they told us it was going to be for hosting Exchange and Microsoft SQL Server. And we could see how our system was responding with this. So it was great. Our beta started in April of 2010. And it was scheduled to run till September, end of September. But the beta went actually very well, and by the end of August, we had our first sale. So this is a long answer to your question, but a lot of customer validation up front, even before we built the system, and then having really good betas who used the system. And then actually have our system do exactly what we told the customers it would do. All of that fed back, and we got our first sale, and then the sales started coming fairly quickly after that.
So do customers, they usually recommend the brand when they use it to others, or?
Absolutely. So even going back to our initial time, I think 8 or 9 of our 10 beta sites bought the system, which is actually amazing. When at Data Domain, that percentage was a whole lot less. So we had very good take up right at the initial time, and now a huge number of our sales are reference sales. Most in storage, because storage is so critical to any company, because if your storage goes down, nobody is working. So storage is very, very critical to a company. And typically what happens is, for a startup, people say, hey, before I buy your system, I want to do a 1 month, 2 month trial just to check that it is solid. And in our case, over 90% of our systems are sold without trials, which is an incredible percentage. And the way, the reason we are able to sell without trials is that we have great references. Customers say, hey, can I talk to somebody who's been using your system? And we can give them 5 or 6 names, very quickly, and say, people have been using this for 1 or 2 years. Ask them about their experience. Some people check on the web to see what sort of experience people have been having with Nimble Storage. So when you get a lot of good positive feedback, that helps a lot. So there is nothing like having satisfied customers. They are your best advocates.
So will we been confronted in field with any major or serious issues?
There's always issues that with any complex software product or hardware product, actually any system. And the important thing is to realize these will happen and then put systems in place to react to them quickly. So one of the nice things that we had was, a lot of experience with this at my prior companies. We had some excellent people in support. Rod Bag, our VP of support, is just a superstar. And so there was great collaboration between support and engineering. We've been through our share of big customer issues, but the team has just been tremendous. The engineering team has done awesome work whenever called on, nights, weekends, and now we are very proud of our stability. In fact, now the support load is comparatively low just because of all the work that was done previously.
Since you talked about venture capitalists, you had a good relation with venture capitalists. What advice will you give to young entrepreneurs who do not have that relationship and they want to seek the funding?
So there are 2 ways to go about it. For young entrepreneurs, now you have the ability to even avoid venture capitalists, because depending on the area that you work in, you may not need very much funding. And so you could fund yourself out of your savings. You could fund yourself out by having a full-time job and doing your project on the side, nights and weekends. Or you could look for angels. There are people who are willing to give you funding, in a more informal way. So that's one way of getting funding. Another way of getting funding actually does come back to savings. Join a good startup, make some money on the startup, and then you can do your own startup. So that's another way. And then the way I did it was that I had joined a series of startups and gotten to know VCs. And that takes time. You have to put in some amount of years in terms of being at startups and getting to know VCs. And so when I was able to do that, then we had the relationships and were able to use those to get funding.
Do you envisage or plan to build yet another startup when Nimble goes IPO or establishes its brand name?
At this point, no. I don't think. And the reason is, I think Nimble has just a tremendous opportunity ahead of it. We have, we have the potential here of building one of the big and well-known companies in the valley. In fact, one of the models I look up to is Network Appliance. I really respect the company. They've done a tremendous job. And over the last 20 years, they've grown to be a big company. They've built excellent products, and they've done well in terms of it being a great place to work. Now, technology moves on, and I think we have that opportunity now of also building a great company and a place where people like to come to work. So that's my ambition, to be here and build that big company.
How much supportive is your family about your business ventures?
This is an important thing. You really need your family's support. And so before I got started, I had a long chat with my wife, and we had very young kids at the time. In fact, I had a 2-year-old, and my second child was born the day after Nimble got incorporated in California. So we had very young kids, and so when we had talked about it, she was solidly behind me, gave me her full support, and that's been very helpful in getting the company started.
Nice. How do you balance time between family and work?
I get asked this question a lot, and I think the answer is really, it's something that everybody has to decide for themselves. It's you have the ability, if you want, to completely immerse yourself in work, but you have to decide if that's really what you want to do, and if you're happy doing that. When you're single, that might be a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But when you're married, your spouse will not be very happy if you pursue that. So I think everybody has to find their balance that works for them, that works for their family, and then you have to draw boundaries. Nobody is going to stop you from working too hard, and so you have to find your own balance and say, I'm happy with the work I've done today. Now it's time to go home. So,
how do you spend your spare time, or to put it in other words, what are your hobbies and interests?
I spend a lot of time with my kids. I enjoy playing golf. So those are the major things that take up my time now. So it's a very full life between the startup and and looking after the kids.
What opportunities do you see in India for startups?
That's really interesting. Now, in India, compared to Silicon Valley, I think India has the advantage of a very large market because of the number of people. And in China, if you compare India to China, you see that China built up its own version of Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter. There is potential in India for India-specific services to happen. Clearly, the mobile is a big potential in India, just because the rate of cell phone usage has grown so tremendously. So I think there is a lot of potential in India with regard to those areas. Now, in our areas, core infrastructure, things like storage, maybe networking, databases, that's a little harder in India because the big markets are over here in the US, and having a presence here right from the start is very helpful because you want to be close to your customers. So I think India is good for some very, very interesting types of startups, and Silicon Valley is good for another class of startups.
Are we selling in India and China, or maybe South Asia?
Yes, we are actually selling in Asia now. We started with Australia and then Singapore, but the plans are absolutely to be selling in India. And in fact, we've had a system in India for a long time in Bangalore. So one of our early systems was in India, and it was great to see, we have a world map with all of our systems, so it was great to see that, we had the Nimble flag in India many years ago.
I presume it was with MSIS, if I'm not wrong.
No, actually it was with Sequoia Capital in India.
Okay.
So Sequoia Capital bought a system here in Sand Hill Road, and they bought another system in India that runs their India office.
So we'll be opening a sales office shortly.
I hope so. I'm not sure about the exact time frame,
Mm.
but we will be opening a sales office at some point.
And last question before you leave. What advice would you give to young students or people like me who are looking to you and Umesh as a role model and hoping someday to start their successful enterprise?
I think it is a very worthy dream, and don't be disheartened. It takes a long time. I was in the Valley for 20 years before I started my own successful startup. So it is just with every job that you have, you're building up very useful experience. You're meeting new people who at someday you might work with. So remember your long-term vision and just work toward it. And at the same time, you're always gaining new experience, gaining new contacts, and hopefully even getting more and more secure financially.
Thank you very much for taking time and talking with us. It was a privilege to talk with you.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you.